So this is not the first time that we have had these two incredible people together in 2020. They were together virtually for World Mental Health Day, October 10th, 2020, as well as at the White House in 2022 for the first ever Youth Action Forum on Mental Health. So these are two of our
besties.
So you've both been such an incredible inspiration and source for guidance to so many people through this work. Both of you have emphasized and talked a lot about the importance of community and connection. It's always been a constant pillar in the narrative that you've talked about. And so, Selena, I want to start with you. We know that when you created Rare Beauty, you always wanted it to be more than a beauty brand. So why is a day like today, the Rare Beauty Mental Health Summit, where we're bringing all these people together, why is it so important to you? Why is it so special?
I was actually just speaking about this. This is actually my favorite part of what I do. It genuinely, it shows how powerful we can be when we're all together and understanding, and having community is so important. So the moment I even decided to do a cosmetics brand, this was born before our actual product. So this is something very dear to me, and I'm very grateful for all of you for being here, so thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Murthy, community, connection, loneliness, all themes and things that you talk about a lot, and you sort of went on your own journey when you first became Surgeon General. You went cross-country on a listening tour, listening and asking questions, listening to people from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, all demographics. And a lot of that helped shape your advisory about loneliness and isolation. And so can you share a little bit about what some of those findings were and why that became such a focus for your work?
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Elise. And I'm so glad to be here again. It's always so nice to do things together with you, Selena. I'm so glad we're on this journey together. I will tell you that this was an unexpected journey for me, working on issues like loneliness and isolation, and even mental health more broadly. Even though as a kid I struggled a lot with my own mental health and was feeling really lonely at times. I'm an introvert, I'm shy, and certainly was that way even more so as a kid. And so there were times, long times, when I felt quite isolated and alone. But all those years I never really talked about it. And I felt, I think, somewhat ashamed that I was having those struggles. And it was only being years later, in fact, when I became Surgeon General and I started traveling around the country, that I realized that these are incredibly common experiences that a lot of folks were going through. And I think when you think about something like loneliness, for example, most people think, well, the picture of loneliness might be somebody who is older, and maybe a lot of the people they've loved over the course of their life have passed away or no longer with them, and so they're living alone and they're feeling lonely. But that is actually not the predominant picture of loneliness. What I found when I traveled the country is college students were telling me that they were on campuses with thousands of other students, but nobody really knew them for who they were. They didn't feel like they could be themselves, and so they felt really alone. I talked to a lot of moms and dads who told me that they were surrounded by neighbors and people at work and by folks all the time, yet they too felt like they had to carry all these burdens on their shoulders by themselves. And just like that, like wherever demographic I went to, whether it was CEOs or members of Congress, or whether it was folks who were running businesses, like a lot of them talked about loneliness and about how they were struggling with that. So that is what really got me to dig deeper into this. And I'll lastly just say that I came to realize in the course of this work that loneliness is so much more than a bad feeling. It's a deep source of pain. And it's partly so painful because we need each other. We need our relationships with one another to really survive, to thrive, to be healthy both mentally and physically. And when we don't have that, it's almost like we're missing food or water, something else that's really vital for our survival. And so I think to anyone out there who's felt the pain of loneliness, one of the things I want you to know is that that pain is real, and you are not alone in feeling that pain. A lot of people in the country are struggling with loneliness. It's why when we issued our report last year, we called it our epidemic of loneliness and isolation, because it truly has reached epidemic proportions. And in that report, we also laid out what we can actually do about this crisis.
Which we'll get to. I want to touch on something because I know both of you, we talk a lot about social media, and at Rare Beauty, we really leverage social in a positive way. We take detoxes, but we also leverage the platform to educate and provide real mental health resources because we know that's where a lot of young people are spending their time. We also know that there are negative impacts that social media can have. And Dr. Murphy, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about some guidance and some work and what you recommend on how we sort of embrace and thoughtfully and safely leverage social media. And Selena, I know also you've talked a lot about how you manage your relationship with social as well.
Well, I've had a very complex relationship with social media. I remember when it came out, it was the weirdest thing. I didn't believe it would do anything. And I recognized that a lot of feelings that I didn't feel growing up just started happening. So it would make me feel like I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't really leading a good life, or, oh, everybody else gets this and it's just very silly. And ultimately I took 4 years off, and that was the best gift I could have given myself because I was actually aware of what was happening. I would get phone calls from friends instead of, did you see my story? It was like, well, tell me your story. You know, it's like now I can have communication. But I think for my personal one, I love being able to share a little bit of my life, but with Rare Beauty, all the comments are always available, being looked through and searched through, and we just want to make sure that we're doing the best we can with social media. But I do think it's important to take some breaks every now and then. But you'll say something way better, so.
Actually, I love what you said, Selena, because, you know, when I've been traveling around to high schools and colleges in particular, talking to students about mental health, they always bring up social media, and they actually mention a lot of what you just said, that using social media, while it can have some benefits, sometimes they can connect with old friends, and they can learn interesting information. In parallel also, though, they also often find it makes them feel worse about themselves because they're constantly comparing themselves to other people. And then also it can sometimes expose them to content that doesn't make them feel great either. Sometimes there's a lot of negative news or a lot of negative comments or bullying or harassment. But I think it's also the time that it steals away from other parts of our life that can be really consequential. You know, over time what's happened is our time in person with people has shifted to online. And that might not seem like a big deal. It's like, well, that's just a new way of communicating with people. But actually it is a big deal because it turns out that over thousands of years we evolved to have face-to-face interactions with people, to interpret, you know, not just the content of what somebody is saying, but also like their body language and the tone of their voice and the facial expression they have, and also what they're not saying and the nuances there. All of that factors into how we understand something and how connected we feel to them. And we often lose a lot of that, like on social media. I think when we also don't have what I think of as the human guardrails, you know, that of normal social interaction that prevent us from being overly mean or judgmental towards somebody in person. We don't have that, and we find that people tend to be much more mean-spirited and much more, I think, lax about that kind of etiquette. They tend to be sometimes more mean and abusive, you know, online, and that can hurt all of us. And so I do think that one of the things that we have to do, there are really two things broadly, I'll say. One is something that is not, you know, any individual's job, and it's really it should be the job of our policymakers to put into place safety standards to at least make social media platforms safer, right? So that young people in particular don't have to deal with the exposure to extreme and harmful content, and don't have to be exposed to manipulative features that would seek to lure them into excessive use. Because, you know, when we're young, our brains are at a different developmental stage. We're much more likely to, for example, compare ourselves to other people. We're much more likely to not be able to manage impulses, you know, as well as we can perhaps when we're older. And so platforms that take advantage of those vulnerabilities in our brain and lure us into excessive use can be harmful. So that's actually a policy change that we have been calling for. Real safety standards, just like we made cars safer, you know, 30 years ago, and that got us seatbelts and airbags and other measures that help reduce car accident-related deaths. Here too, there are safety features we can put in to make it safer. But the last thing I just say is what we can do as individuals, because, you know, this is, I think, where Selena and I have talked in the past about social media, and I think some of the things you do have been, I think, powerful and instructive, which is to actually, each of us need to have tech-free zones in our life. And I know that it seems almost crazy to say, right? Because it feels like our phones are always with us, and our notifications are always buzzing. We're checking our social media all the time. But that actually can be problematic. And if you actually go through a period where you just take a break, let's say for a few days, I know that seems crazy, but just for a few days, you'll start to notice certain things that shift. One is in the beginning, you'll be jittery. You'll be like, wait, where's my phone? I don't want to check. You'll like almost instinctively, you'll just go toward it. But then after a year or two, you'll start to feel that you're perhaps recognizing that there are pockets of time that you have that you didn't have before. You'll recognize that maybe you're more present in conversation with other people than you had been before, because we're always distracted in conversation. Maybe you'll even find that there's some time to reflect without the noise that's constantly brewing around you when you're online constantly. And so I think we all need to have tech-free zones in our life. It can be very simple. You could start with just saying, you know what, an hour before I go to bed, I'm going to put my phone away. I'm going to charge it in the kitchen, and I'm going to check it again in the morning. I'm going to protect my sleep. Another option is you could say, you know what, I'm going to protect time when I'm with my friends. So when I'm with my family, so when we're having dinner together, we're catching up, I'm going to put my devices away. I'm just going to focus on them. However we do it, we all need these tech-free zones in our life. And if we don't have that, I worry that we're going to lose one of the most powerful things that we have, which is our ability to build powerful in-person connections, which truly nurture us.
Thank you. That's why today's so special for us. Selena. So not only did you launch Rare Beauty and wanted this mission and events like this and content and expertise to be shared, but you also launched the Rare Impact Fund, a separate nonprofit organization. And you launched it with this incredibly ambitious goal to raise $100 million to support youth mental health. And I'm just going to read some updated statistics because there's even newer ones from that 2023 report. So since you launched the fund, we've raised over $13 million. We support 26 organizations around the world, many of who are here with us today. Our resources have reached across 5 continents. And on average, annually, we are reaching over 1 million young people, over 700,000 what we're calling stakeholders. And what those are all the people that surround a young person. A parent, a caregiver, a coach, an educator, all the people that we believe need to be educated to help strengthen and understand and be there for young people. And we are also, on average, each year reaching over 1,000 schools and educational systems. And that's just in 3.5 years. Why was doing that so important? Why was launching this long-term commitment and making sure young people had access to resources, why was that so important to you?
I think I've been quite honest with people about my journey, and I found freedom in being able to share with the world that my life wasn't easy. And I knew I wasn't the only one, and I would have meet and greets and meet lovely people, and they would just tell me about the issues that they trust me. They trust me enough to tell me about what's going on, and it's always been something I've cared about, and I want nothing more than to be able to be remembered by things like this, more than anything else. I guess this is what makes me happy.
Thank you. We always say that you've given us such a gift. You've given us your platform. You've given us the platform of the brand, the influence that you have. You've done things like your documentary, and really everything that you touch, you make sure that it is touching this issue. And none of us in this room could do this work without you. So thank you. So Dr. Murthy, I want to go back for a second to your advisory on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and then you also said, and the healing effects of social connection and community. you called attention to this urgent public health issue. And can you help us understand the difference between loneliness and isolation and why you found that both are such urgent issues that need to be addressed now?
Well, at least loneliness is a subjective feeling. It's feeling like you have fewer connections than you actually need in your life, fewer relationships than you actually need. Isolation is a more objective description of how many people you have around you. Like right now, I would say I'm not isolated at all because I have a lot of people around me. But I very well could be in a crowd and feel lonely if I don't feel like I can show up as myself, if I don't feel like people really understand me for who I am. And unfortunately, that is how a lot of people feel today. When we issued our report last year on this subject, there were two big things that we noted. One was that loneliness was incredibly common, that it wasn't just something that a couple of people were experiencing. 1 in 2 adults in America were living with measurable levels of loneliness, but the numbers among young people were actually much higher, closer to 60 or 70%, depending on the study you look at. That's a lot. It means most young people are struggling with loneliness. So if you're feeling that way, just look around you and recognize that you're not the only one. But the other thing we realized was how consequential it was. I mentioned in the beginning that loneliness is more than just a bad feeling. And what we found is that when people are struggling with loneliness and isolation, that social disconnection actually raises the risk of depression and anxiety and suicide. But it also surprisingly raises the risk of physical illness, of heart disease, of stroke, of dementia, of premature death. So much so that we found that the mortality, the sort of life-shortening effect, if you will, of loneliness and isolation were on par with smoking daily. They were even greater than the effects that we saw with obesity. And we think about those, smoking and obesity is really important public health issues, right? Well, it turns out that loneliness and isolation are just as important for us to address, which is why I think it's really important for all of us as individuals, but also for schools and for workplaces and for policymakers to really think about how we rebuild social infrastructure in our lives. How do we make it easier for people to come together, to build healthy relationships with one another? Because we can't assume that's going to happen, because the last few years have shown us that it's actually going the other way. We've got to proactively build these into our lives. And lastly, just say it doesn't have to be, that can feel like a big task, but it doesn't have to be big. We can actually start really small. Like if you just take, for example, 15 minutes a day to reach out to somebody that you care about. It could be just checking on a friend on the way to work. It could be swinging by, to see a friend, at the end of the day or on the weekend. Those 15 minutes over time make a huge difference. The second thing you do is one small thing each day to help someone. It could be really small. You see somebody who's struggling with their groceries, you help them lift it up. You see somebody who's lost in the street corner, you pause to ask them if they need directions, or you help out a friend who's having a tough time that day. One small thing to help somebody each day can make a big difference. And then the third thing I'll mention is what we chatted about before, which is drawing these boundaries in your life around technology. So use some tech-free zones in your life where you can focus on yourself, on each other. These small steps can make a huge difference ultimately in how connected you feel.
What's one of the steps that you take each day?
So all three of these are actually important in my life. So every day, like I'm blessed to live at home with family. I've got a wife and 2 kids who are 6 and 7. But I also make it a point to call my mother or my sister or my father, usually all 3 each day. And even it might just be a short call, 5 minutes. But I've been doing that since I left for college, actually, every day.
I love that you said call, not text.
Yes.
Call.
And that's really important. Like you think of it kind of as a ladder of engagement, right? Seeing someone in person is the best. One step down from there might be video conferencing with them, so you can see them and actually hear their voice. One step down from there would be actually talking to them on the phone. You're hearing their voice. That's great. A step down from there might be emailing them, because those messages tend to be longer and more thoughtful. And one step down from there might be texting, right, where there's your short snippets. Again, there's a role for texting, but we shouldn't ever assume that texting replaces those in-person connections. There's just a huge difference. So that's something that I try to do consistently every day. And I also just try to make sure that the zone in my life that I try to protect from technology is dinner time with my family, right? And every now and then, it's important to have people in our life who hold us accountable.
Yeah.
Right? So whenever you make these kind of pacts and say, okay, I'm going to make that a tech-free zone, or I'm going to give up social media for 3 days and see how I feel, I would strongly suggest doing it with a pal. with a buddy, because you can check on each other. And the person who keeps me accountable is my wife. So every now and then if I'm at the table and my phone buzzes and my eyes wander over, I'm like, trying to look at it. My wife will be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? I'm like, yes, sorry, put that away. So we all need someone to keep us accountable.
I love that. Selena, do you have one thing you do each day to feel like connected to friends, family?
Definitely. I am horrible at responding to texts in general, so don't text me. It's more of like, I'm just a little bit more old school, so I like calling. But for example, the other day, my friend was going through a breakup, and I had the day off of work, and I just went to her office and sat with her for like an hour or two and just talked, because I didn't have anything else to do. I would have sat and watched Friends, and that's what
There's
I did
never
all
a
the
time
time.
that she doesn't have anything else to do.
No problem, but it's genuinely the littlest things. I mean, I work with incredible people in my life, and I watch them handle themselves, remember people's name, shows up on time. All of these things matter, and I feel really lucky to be surrounded by people that can help me feel like I can do something every day. And that's as simple as even calling my 10-year-old sister. She doesn't really want to be on the phone with me, but she'll be there. Oh,
She just wants to make videos.
She's like, okay, well, good to see you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to wrap us up something like this is so special. We've all been working on this issue for several years, an issue that for years nobody talked about, and now it's in headlines. Brands are focusing on it. We have the Surgeon General. We have well-known, famous, incredible people like you. And so with that, I want to ask each of you, Selena, I'll start with you. What's your hope? What's your hope for the future of this issue of mental health and connection, and what makes you really hopeful?
Well, I think moments like this make me very hopeful, but I don't think I'll ever stop doing this. So I want to say on my part, I have great relationships, and I'm able to do as much as I can. I'm obviously not a political figure or anything, but I would do as much as I possibly could. Eventually, I probably would stop work and devote most of my time to this. That'll be a while from now, but I don't know. I think it's, I have big hopes, but I don't know what that looks like. I just want it to be something that people can feel and understand and have sympathy for.
Like people are like people talk about the issue more than they did, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Murphy, what makes you hopeful about this work, this issue, the future?
Well, I actually, as deep as this problem is, mental health, loneliness, isolation, I feel more hopeful now than I ever have been. And I think the reason is because of gatherings like this, because of the conversations I've had with young people in particular around the country who are not just looking at this whole challenge we have and saying, there's nothing I can do, but they want to be a part of the solution. They want to help one another. And my hope for the future is that we can, in our relationships with one another, be reminded of our own self-worth, be reminded that we do have value to add to the world, and be reminded that sometimes our greatest sources of joy and satisfaction come from being connected to something bigger than ourselves. See, I worry that there's a lot in the world right now that's telling us that if we want to make it, if we want to be successful, if we want to be fulfilled, that the key to doing that is to becoming famous, it's becoming rich, it's becoming powerful, getting more and more sort of, if you will, for ourselves that will ultimately help us be worthy. But I think that couldn't be further from the truth. There's nothing wrong with any one of those things, but there is something problematic, I think, if we assume that those are the primary pathways to fulfillment. What we find time and time again, like throughout history, and in our own lives if we look really carefully, is that the people who are often the most fulfilled are the people who are the most connected to others. It doesn't mean you need to have 1,000 friends, but having one or two people who you deeply care about, who care about you, can make all the difference in the world. Now, this is something that I've been reminded of in my own care of patients over the years. You know, when I think about what people talk about at the end of their life, it's not about how much money was in their bank account, or how big their corner office was, or how much was on their resume or their CV. You know, those last few hours and days of people's lives, when they're reflecting on what really matters, they talk about their relationships. They talk about the people they love, the people who love them, people who broke their heart. And I share this because I don't believe that we have to wait till the end of our lives to realize that lesson. We can start today by focusing on our relationships with one another. And try to just keep this in mind. When I said in the beginning, my hope is that through our relationships with each other, we'll realize that we matter, that we can value. But I also hope we realize the truth of who we are, which is that we as people, despite what we may hear about online, we are not mean-spirited by nature. We are not cruel by nature. We are not insensitive by nature. And in our hearts, I do fundamentally believe, because I've seen it, that we are caring, that we are compassionate, that we are loving toward one another. And we come into the world that way. You know, I know this because I see that in my own children. I was shared with a group the other day that, I've been dealing with this shoulder issue for a while, this like frozen shoulder, and it means that when I do sudden motions with my shoulder, sometimes I get a lot of pain. And I forget that though sometimes. So I was at the dining table with my kids, and my 6-year-old daughter like tossed something my way. And then I immediately instinctively leapt for it. And I regretted it immediately because I felt this lancing pain go through my shoulder. And immediately I buckled, I got on the floor, and my eyes were squinted shut, and I was like holding my shoulder. And while I was in that position, I suddenly felt a small hand rest on my shoulder. I felt a small head lean against my head. And I opened my eyes. There was my 7-year-old son. And nobody had taught him to do that. But his instinct was in the face of pain to respond with empathy, with care, and with love. And that is the instinct that we all have when we come into this world. And even though it may be buried sometimes by layers of pain and injury and cynicism and doubt, it's still there. It's still the truth of who we are. And my hope is that we can reach for that truth, that we can help each other see that truth, that we can express that love, that kindness, and compassion with one another that we so desperately need more of in the world. And if we do that, then I think we can create what all of us want, which is a life that's happy, that's healthy, and that's truly fulfilled.
Thank you both so much for joining us today, for the work you do every day, for spending time with us. May is a very busy month for both of you. So we really appreciate you being with us and sharing all of your insights and personal expertise. Thank you.
Thank you guys.